All right, today we're going to talk about topic 9.5, which is the equilateral triangle theorem. Very similar to the isosceles triangle theorem, so this isn't really new stuff. They're actually easier than isosceles triangles. So let's talk about what that means. So the equilateral triangle theorem states that if three sides of a triangle are congruent, then all three angles are also congruent. So that is the big idea when we're talking about equilateral triangles. It should make sense when we're talking about isosceles triangles. So if I have an equilateral triangle, let's call it triangle A, B, C, and all three of these sides are the same. So what this theorem is basically stating is if that all three of the sides are the same, then all three of the angles are the same. So if I was going to write that in words, I would say if AB is congruent to BC, which is congruent to AC, then angle A is congruent to angle B, which is congruent to angle C. So exactly what we were talking about. So just like we were talking about isosceles triangles, if I draw arrows from all the sides that are the same, you can tell which angles are congruent and they're all the same. Now this is the other very, very important thing when we're talking about equilateral triangles. So we know that a triangle, the entire measure of the angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. We know that. We've been talking about it for weeks now. What we have to understand is in an equilateral triangle, for this to be an equilateral triangle and all three of those angles to be equal, they can only be one thing. So write this down. Make sure you remember it. This is just as important as remembering that what a right angle looks like or that a triangle has 180 degrees. So all three angles in an equilateral triangle are 60 degrees. That's the only thing they can be. All three of these angles have to be 60 degrees. They have to be because that's the only way that all three of them can be the same and they can add up to 180 degrees. So there's nothing else that those three angles can be. So that's very important when we're talking about solving, and it's going to help us know some things. So you have to remember that. All three angles in an equilateral triangle are 60 degrees. Again, because they all have to be the same, that's all they can be. All right, let's look at some examples. So on number 1, we're going to find x in this triangle. So I'm gonna go ahead and label some of the stuff. We're gonna say that this is an equilateral triangle. So all three sides are the same, which means we know that all three angles of these are the same. And I'm gonna tell you that angle D is 6x minus 6. And I want you to find out what x is. Well, we already know from this statement up here that all three angles in an equilateral triangle are 60 degrees. So I don't know what all these angles are, and they all are, since I don't know what they are and they're all the same, all these would also be 6x minus 6. So I could add all these up and equal to 180, but that's the long way. The short way would be to know that all three of these angles, since it's an equilateral triangle, all of them have to be 60 degrees. So if all of them have to be 60 degrees, I can take that 6x minus 6 and equal it to 60 and find out what the measure of the angle is. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. 6 comes down. 6x is equal to 66 divided by 6, and x equals 11. Very simple stuff. Now I could have, again, added all of these angles up, 6x minus 6 plus 6x minus 6 plus 6x minus 6 to equal 180, but that's the long way. So remembering that each angle in an equilateral triangle is 60 degrees will always help you. All right, on number 2, we're going to find x and y. So we got an equilateral triangle, which means, again, we know that all three of these angles on the inside are the same, because if I drew arrows from all the congruent sides, it would point to every angle in the triangle. So it's the same exact process we talk about when we did It's the same exact process that we talked about when we did isosceles triangle. All right, now I'm going to tell you that angle B is 5y, and I'm also going to tell you that angle A is 10x minus 180 degrees. All right, so again, this is an equilateral triangle, so the important thing to remember, again, you got to remember this just like you remember that a square in the corner of a triangle means a right angle. You know all three of these angles are 60 degrees. So that's going to help us solve. So if I know A is 60 degrees and it's 10 times x minus 180, I can set those two things equal to each other. So 10 times x minus 180 is equal to 60. First thing I got to do is distribute. So 10 times x is 10x. 10 times negative 180 would be negative 1800 is equal to 60. I'm going to add 1800 to both sides, just like I would any other number. So I get 10x is equal to 1860. Divide both sides by 10, and I get x is equal to 186. Now if I wanted to find y, same thing here. We know that y and 60, we know that b is the same as 60 degrees, so 5y is the same as 60 degrees. So I'm going to set those two things equal to each other. 5y is equal to 60. Divide both sides by 5, and I get y is equal to 12. Very simple stuff. So again, this is easier than isosceles triangles, but the important thing to remember is this right here. All three angles in an equilateral triangle are 60 degrees. That'll help you solve a lot of problems. So make sure you have that written down. Write down any questions you have, and I'll see you in class.